All right. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Matt Bennett with Third Way. Thank you so much for joining us. I see that people are kind of streaming in at the moment. We are joined, of course, by former Governor and hopefully, in my view, at least future Governor Terry McAuliffe. We will be getting going here in just a couple minutes. I'll say this again when everybody else joins, but the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, you can use that to send questions. I'll be reading as many of those as we can get to in the time that we've got with Governor McAuliffe. I'm going to start off with a few questions from Third Way and then ask some participant questions. So again, use the Q&A function there at the bottom of your screen to ask questions. And in just a couple of minutes, we'll get going. All right, well, it does look like we have a lot of people here already, so let's get started for people who show up on time. Again, I'm Matt Bennett with Third Way. Delighted to be joined by Governor Terry McAuliffe. Both of us are sons of Syracuse, New York. Both grew up there and moved to Virginia. And between us, half of us got elected governor of Virginia. So we're very proud of that.
Still hope for you, Matt.
Yeah. And it's always a pleasure to talk to Governor McAuliffe because he has experience obviously as a DNC party chair, as a business leader, as somebody who has been very close to a president and knows just about everything there is to know about politics and government. So couldn't have a better guest for us today when governors are so much a part of the response to the twin crises we're facing in both public health and the economy. So why don't we go ahead and kick this thing off? And I'm going to start, Governor, with a kind of broad question. If you and I were just discussing this, you've been talking to Governor Northam of Virginia. I'm sure you're talking to other governors all the time. In your view, how does a smart, good governor think about, at this moment, the balance between public health and the economy as they're thinking about whether to open and how?
Yeah. By far, your number one issue is the safety of your citizens. Your job as governor is to build the roads, clean the roads, run healthcare, run your education system. But far superseding anything, Matt, is keeping your citizens safe. And you don't want to open up too early. And then obviously, if we have the W, which they talk about, that will be more destructive, as I tell governors all the time, that will be more destructive to your economy than opening up too early. If you open up and then it comes back, you have crippled your economy going forward. So you got to rely on your health experts first and foremost. They'll tell you when. I think most governors are looking at a 14-day decline in deaths, hospitalizations, and so forth. I think that's the smart way to look at it. But whether we open in May 15th, June 15th, or July 15th, the issue's got to be what is going to keep your folks the safest. It doesn't matter to your economy another 30 or another 60 or 90 days. So I would always lean on the caution side about reopening an economy. Very, very smart about. We here, where we live here in Virginia, Maryland, and DC, we have not peaked yet. You've seen the deaths have gone up, the number of those that have coronavirus has gone up. So we're not peaking here yet, and it's going to take some time. We had a UVA study the other day that said it could be August. So if I'm governor, that's what I'm looking at first and foremost. What's going to keep your citizens safe? We're all going to have to rebuild our economies, no question about it, but that's secondary in my mind.
You know, you were governor of a pretty big state that has a very diverse economy and geography.
Yeah.
You and I are both from Syracuse, and if you're Governor Cuomo, if you're Governor Northam, what do you say to the people of upstate New York or downstate Virginia that say, look, we know things are bad in your metro areas around New York City or around the Washington region, but we don't really have the virus here and you're killing our economy. Can't we open up at different rates? But how do you answer that question?
I think it's very hard to open up within a state. I still think what we ought to do here, and I wrote an op-ed with General McChrystal, that these governors need to do it regionally. I did this before the compacts got started. I'm here in Northern Virginia. I'm 2 miles from DC. I'm 2 miles from Maryland. We're so interconnected. So if you open up a part of the state, people are going to travel. It defeats the whole purpose. When you open up, you ought to open up. And listen, it's hard in rural communities. Many of them don't have the broadband. My wife, Dorothy, who led the effort to make sure every needy child in Virginia got access to a healthy breakfast. I had 60,000 children in Virginia when I became governor. that did not have access to a healthy breakfast. So by the time I left office, every child was covered. They got a breakfast or a lunch, summer meals. We're in a real distress situation today. She's now the national spokesperson for No Kid Hungry. It's a crisis around the country today for many children. They get their nutritious meals at school, and the Trump administration has really caused issues on SNAP benefits and the regulations. You can come pick it up one day, you can't get 3 days worth, just really ridiculous, horrible things. So you got these rural communities, I feel for them. I mean, I lived through this. When I got elected in 2014, sworn in, I inherited the worst economy we've ever had. I inherited a record deficit from the Republicans, $2.4 billion. We had the Great Recession, but we had sequestration, which Virginia is the #1 recipient of Department of Defense salaries. We have the largest naval base in the world, the Pentagon, CIA, Quantico, 27 military operations. And the problem was that with sequestration, our state had so dependent on defense spending that we never thought that would go away. That's an economy that I inherited. I said, we're going to build a new Virginia economy. We got to work. I was the most traveled governor in America. I went to 35 trade missions to 100 countries, recruited 1,147 companies. 4 years later, I left the biggest surplus in the history of the Commonwealth of Virginia. Redid my education system, was the most progressive governor in the history of the state. We had horrible anti-women, anti-gay. As you know, I restored more felon rights than any governor in American history. I got sued by the Republicans. I got sued for contempt of court and ultimately won. My point was you have to make your state open and welcoming. But what these governors now have to think about, just as I had to deal with sequestration, you got to build a new economy. You got to deal with the gig economy. How do these folks get health care? How do you reform your education system so that you can recruit businesses from around the globe? And we made Virginia the #1 state for cyber, data, unmanned systems. When I left office, 5.8 to 3.6 unemployment rate, we were humming. I had 48,000 open cyber jobs when I left office, starting pay $88,000. That's what we're going to have to do, think differently. I was a very pro-jobs governor. That's what I ran on, because you can have the most progressive ideas in the world, but if you don't have money to fund them, it really doesn't matter. First and foremost, after safety, is building a strong economy. And I was very proud when I left office that unemployment in every rural county in Virginia declined by 50%.
Let me remind our attendees that the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, you can submit questions, and we will get to as many of those as we can. Let me change gears a little bit and ask you a somewhat more pointed political question. You have seen some of your Democratic colleagues, the governors of states like California, New Jersey, Colorado, New York, having to balance telling the truth about the failures of the federal government and stroking the ego of the president, because if they don't, they risk losing access to money and PPE and other things that their constituents desperately need. They're starting to look like hostage videos. So what would you do if you were governor of Virginia right now? How would you balance that?
Well, it's probably good maybe I'm not governor of Virginia, because I call the shots the way I see them. I remind you that when Trump got elected, I was chairman of the NGA, National Governors Association. I dealt with him. He and I fought constantly over ICE detainers, immigration reform, healthcare, Charlottesville. I remind you that I talked to the president that day, explained to him that I have 1,000 neo-Nazis, white supremacists, using the most offensive language I've ever heard about women, blacks. I remember standing in front of the synagogue and they walking by with all my state police with me saying, we're going to burn you, and we're going to burn that synagogue like we did in Auschwitz. I told the president, today is your day, Mr. President, to come out and show that you are a true leader, show the world that these are not Americans. This is not who we are. And as you remember, Matt, he failed that day, and he said there were good people on both sides after he promised me on the phone. And then I had to go out and say what the president should have said. So I never hedged my bets. I always speak what I think is right. And if I felt the federal government wasn't doing what they needed to do, I would have been vocal. But I understand the governor's, he is so mean-spirited, so malicious, so politically minded that he literally, as you know, I mean, we've all probably heard about the case of the governor of Colorado, who went out through a private vendor to buy 500 ventilators, acquired the deal. FEMA jumps in front, takes the 500 ventilators, Trump then tweets out a couple days later, oh, I'm giving Colorado 100 ventilators because Cory Gardner asked me who was running for re-elect in the Senate. So I understand some of them they do. That's just not my personality. I'd rather let the chips fall with me. But here's the problem. And I dealt with Ebola. And I can tell you this, I had a great working relationship when Ebola started to happen. My first call was to President Obama and Vice President Biden. I put a task force. I immediately took over UVA and VCU and built Ebola wards. They gave me the CDC. We talked to the CDC 3 times a day through the Ebola crisis. I had an international airport, obviously very dull, so we were very concerned. I cannot tell you how helpful the White House, the CDC was. My health professionals who work for me work for Ralph still. They don't ever hear from the CDC. And many of the information they get from the CDC, unfortunately, is very contradictory. And that's the problem. As a governor, you know, we would have no idea over COVID. We don't have intelligence networks. We don't. We rely on the federal government. And the biggest failure was in November, December, when he had it in the PDB, the Presidential Daily Brief, and January 3rd, when he was briefed by intelligence. At that point, he should have alerted all of us, or every governor. And then you could take the precaution that you did. We were 10, 12 weeks behind where we needed to be. As governor, I would immediately mobilize my National Guard. I would have gone out to get ventilators en masse. Every governor would have done it. I think that the NGA should have teamed up with FEMA, and they should have become the buying entity for the ventilators and the masks so that there wasn't scalping. I mean, you had a Game of Thrones going on here between governors buying things overseas, scalpers taking advantage of the states, and you know, it became a real mishmash. It is the worst executive leadership I have ever seen. So I don't blame any governor, because in some states, they are in such financial trouble that they don't dare question the president, and that's their right to do it. I just think, you know, my personality, I would not have been in that category. If I felt that the federal government, and I would have done the same if it was President Obama and felt the federal government hadn't done their role. That wasn't the case for me. But, you know, you're there for your citizens, and you've got to speak your mind and, you know, do what you got to do.
Let me ask you kind of the inverse of that question. That's about managing the president. What about if you're governor and you have a stay-at-home order, but a local official is defying that order? A mayor says, no, that's not how we're going to do things here. How should governors handle that?
You know, at certain times, you know, the one thing is I did as governor is get rid of all unfunded mandates, because I think it's very fair if the state, you know, would like to say, oh, we're balancing our budget, but all they've done is really push it down to the local level. I don't think that is fair, and it's not right. I got rid of that practice. But if I had a mayor or county executive and they were defying an order to keep our citizens safe, the first thing I would have done, Matt, without going to the press or anything, I would have called up that mayor, if it's a mayor, and explained to him the severity of this, and you're imperiling the lives of everyone in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And I would have made it perfectly clear that if that type of behavior continued, there would be ramifications. I'll leave it at that. But governor controls a lot of financial tools. Mm-hmm. And you just got to, you know, listen, you have to do this as a unit. And I think we as a nation and our states, we have really reduced the number that would have gotten coronavirus with these stay-at-home orders. It works, there's no question about it. I'm sure everybody on this call, most people know me. I usually spend 200 days a year traveling around the globe. This is abnormal for all of us. I can tell you this, at the McAuliffe household, every single spice, every single Campbell's soup is now in alphabetical order. I am home now a lot doing in between my Biden calls. And but you know, generally they're going to pay attention to the governor because, as I say, you control the road building, education funding, healthcare delivery. That all, and I've argued, Matt, for a long time. I think a governor should be president. They used to be that, because at the end of the day, governors have to balance budgets. They build the roads. I dealt with tornadoes. I dealt with flooding, derechos. You know, you're a commander in chief. You've got your National Guard that you call out, and you have the executive experience. And I think through this crisis, you have really shown the value of governors in the country.
I'm going to go to a question from one of our attendees. Again, you can ask a question on the Q&A function. This question is, as a former DNC chair, what would you do about the convention?
Yeah, and this is me speaking. I'm talking to our chairman, Tom Perez, a lot. If I don't see any change in these numbers, I think it's highly unlikely that you would have a convention. I don't think it's wise to put 30 or 40,000 people in Milwaukee, opening people up. And I love conventions. I've chaired a couple. I ran it as the chairman of the DNC. But the conventions are not about what happens at the convention. It's what you're presenting to the American public. I mean, that is the whole reason behind having a convention, is you get that television time to showcase your ideas and who you are and your vision forward. So it really doesn't matter if you have a convention. We can do it virtually. And if that's the case, let's highlight. Biden's got to highlight where he wants to take the country, highlight the failures of the Trump administration. You could do that in pockets around the country, people who haven't gotten health care. So we can get to the same place. But knowing what I know today, and this is just me speaking, I don't want anyone to say Terry McAuliffe says there's not going to be a convention. I know this is a fact because I'm dealing with it. No decision's been made. But if we are where we are today, it's just not worth the risk. And I think we should go to a virtual convention. And it won't hurt the party at all. We'll get to the same place we need to be. I just got off the phone with a reporter from the Washington Post who is writing a story, is Biden, they're not moving fast enough. Let me tell you, everybody, I have done this a long time. We have the earliest nomination we have had since 2004. I remind you, in 2008, Hillary didn't get out until June. July is when Bernie Sanders got out in 2016. Here we are in April. The runner-up, Bernie Sanders, is already out. Our coalition is organized. We have the DNC, and I've been intimately involved in all those processes. The joint fundraising agreement is signed. I chair this other effort called Organizing Together, which we went out and started in January because we raised millions for it. I was very concerned we were going to have a brokered convention. And we can't wait till July to get our field operation in place. We've already hired 400 field organizers who are already in the ground in 6 states. We'll be at 500 by June, and then we merge them into the Biden campaign. So my point to everybody is, Biden's not a governor. He doesn't have the National Guard. He doesn't have the White House briefing room. He's doing what he can do. And as long as we have Trump every day going out and giving his insane statements that he makes, as you saw in the Wall Street Journal NBC poll last week, only 1 in 3 Americans trust him to deal with the coronavirus. We're in great shape. Now, we should be spending this time putting the party together, getting everything organized, and when the switch goes on, we've got everything in place. So I'm very happy where we are today. We're in better shape we've ever been since John Kerry in 2004. This is the earliest we've been able to come together as a unified party.
Another question from one of our attendees is, as somebody who has been kind of doing Democratic messaging on TV for decades, you are quite aware of how effective it can be for Trump to essentially lie his way into a message. And the question is this: do you think Trump and his allies will succeed in this new effort to question the accuracy of the death toll? Because that's going to be a major part of the indictment against Trump.
The answer is yes. I think let me be very clear. There is no low that Donald Trump will not go to win re-election. We just got to understand that going in. If he has to do nuclear bombs in North Korea, whatever it may be, he is going to use everything that he has to win this re-election. So I think he's going to manipulate everything that listen, I mean, the Washington Post documents this every day. I think we're up to 18,000 lies since he's been in office. So he's going to continue to lie. We have to be prepared. The things I'm most concerned about, and looking broadly electorally, remember, we lost 3 states by 77,000 votes: Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. And I think we had about 50,000 people in those 3 states vote for a third-party candidate like Jill Stein. We're not going to have that this time. In addition, since 2016, I think the day after the election, people woke up and said, holy cow, how did this possibly happen? And you look at turnout around the country: 17, Virginia, biggest in 100 years. 18, we win the House, 7 governors, 8 chambers, 350 state legislative seats. Same thing happened in 19, pick up the House, Senate, first time in 26 years to have all the branches. This year, our turnout in the primary, Matt, was up 68% in Virginia. That is almost statistically impossible. The point I'm making is people are energized. Trump is the greatest unifier of our party we've ever had, number one. And we have registered millions of new voters. So those 3 states, we're in great shape today. But add a North Carolina or an Arizona or a Florida, which we're ahead in today. So I think electorally we're in great shape. He can't do anything about the election. I get asked this every day. Under the Constitution of the United States, he has 4 years to the hour. And on January 20th at noon, he's gone. And the Congress, under very rare circumstances, they changed a congressional election in North Carolina. They could move it maybe a month back. That's not really going to matter. But it's not like they're going to delay the election. They can't. The president is done after 4 years, no matter who it is. So we're going to have it. But I do worry about voter suppression. I also one of the founders of the NDRC with Eric Holder. This voter suppression, the African-American community, the signature laws, the early vote, absentee ballot problems they create, that is what we have to literally be working on. And we're filing lawsuits all over the country. We ought to have vote by mail. Statistically, it doesn't say it's going to help one party over the other. It's just the right thing to do demographically. But, you know, yeah, Trump's going to do everything he can. He can't stay in after he's done. The military, the inaugural committee, the transition, they will all, I'll be happy to join the committee to march him out if he doesn't want to walk out of that office. So we're in pretty good shape here today. I also think we're going to win the Senate. I mean, today we're up in Arizona, we're up in Colorado, we're up in Montana, Maine, North Carolina. I just saw we're up 6. I just did an event with Governor Cooper the other day. This Cal Cunningham, great candidate in North Carolina. We got it all going. But we never, ever can take our foot off that gas because he's going to do everything he possibly can to stay. But I think most Americans, they figured the guy out. And suburban women, record numbers have come over the Democratic side.
So on that theme, another attendee asks, you've hired all these organizers. What are you going to do with them if the recovery is W-shaped? What happens? How do we organize?
That's a great question and something I think about every day. So we went out and got all these organizers and something, Matt, you know, listen, I have lived, breathed this party for 40 years. I've had every job you can have with the party. I've done it all as a full-time volunteer. The one thing that we as a party have always been weak on, we've got great organizers, managers, and election ends, and they go off into the ether. Republicans have always been very good about keeping their people around and working. I was determined with a group, and Paul Tooze is the one who originally came up with the idea, and Governor Raimondo and Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham and I chair this with the labor unions, with all the progressive move on and so forth. Let's go out and hire the best organizers. So when Pete's campaign ended or Amy's campaign ended or whoever, we went out and got their best organizers. So now they're working for us. You're right, we assume they'd be doing door-to-door now. They're not doing any of that today. Right now, they're doing the data work. Obviously, you can work on voter files. You can do the data work, and you can make calls and things like that. But, you know, until we open up, we don't know. It's a great question. And we're hoping that in the fall, things are opened up and people are going back to doing what we do normally political. If they're not, then we're going to have to readjust. But what we can never do as a party is not be prepared. And, you know, as I always like to say, we're in great shape, but if any party can screw it up, it's the Democratic Party. If we just, the stakes are so great. I want to win the Senate. You know, Ruth Bader Ginsburg's 87, Breyer is 81, 82. I mean, for the sake of our country and the things that we actually care about and protecting all the individual social priorities and so forth, we got to get, for the federal judiciary, we've got to win control of the
Senate. Getting back to substance for a moment, you and I talked a little before the call about McConnell's threat to let states go bankrupt. You know, states are suffering through no fault of their own. This is not some sort of blue state mismanagement. This is a world historic crisis. So what do we do about that? What's the message that we want to deliver to voters about Republicans standing in the way of help for the states? And what would be the best form of aid you could get as governor from the feds?
Good question. And first and foremost, understand what this argument is about. If we do not help the states, in Roanoke, Virginia, we're going to start laying off firefighters. We are going to start laying off first responders. We are going to start laying off police officers. This is not about going and dealing with unfunded pension benefits in the states. It is about the core services that states provide. And if these states don't get help, the first place they're going to go is to begin to cut those vital services, fire, police, everything that we rely on every single day. And that's what the argument is about. I just find the whole argument so offensive. As I say, when I became governor, yeah, I inherited a gigantic deficit. It was from the Republican governor and legislature that left it for me. We left the Democrats, we left a huge surplus. But this idea that ours are not well-run states, and I loved what Cuomo did the other day. He put up the chart and he showed the states that are net exporters to the federal treasury and those states that were the net importers. And most of those are the red states who get more than they actually put in. It's the blue states that actually contribute. The state that gets the most, of course, is Virginia, but we're a well-run state, but it's because of all of our, obviously the largest naval base in the world and Pentagon and so forth for Virginia. But we need to do this. If we start, we're talking what, $4 to $7 trillion municipal bond portfolio across this country. If cities and states start defaulting on their debt, it is economic Armageddon. And we will pay so many times more than that. But the whole argument is so offensive because these states are the ones that provide the services. And remember, Matt, we don't print money at the state level. You know, I had to have a balanced budget. When I went in with a deficit, I had to make hard cuts. I didn't like it. I didn't know about it, but I had to do it because we need a balanced budget. It's in our Constitution. Federal government can just print money, and they did the $2 trillion, and you know they're probably going to do $5 trillion more. They're going to push out the door. They need to understand that we need strong states and cities because they provide the essential social services for folks. And I do think McConnell will come around to his senses. I've talked to Speaker Pelosi, and you know they are just insistent that we get this taken care of. But for everybody on this call, if we don't provide the necessary, because so many states, as I say, you know, we're in Great Virginia because we left a big surplus, but you know, if you're a state, let's say Florida, or Louisiana, John Bell Edwards, or Texas, you rely on tourism and you rely on oil. Both of those are gone. A state like Florida that has no personal income tax, tourism, you know, those states, it's going to be very difficult. And what we will begin to see is tremendous layoffs of the social net and security that we need to keep our lives safe. And this is the most fundamental thing. I mean, we've done the small business and, you know, I personally, we got to help these small businesses. I think we should have had better oversight. I read in the Washington Post today that Sidwell Friends, very elite school here with $52 million in their endowment, got $5 million. I got to tell you, I think that's outrageous because there are so many small business owners that have gone under. Restaurants, hair salons, and so forth. You know, mom and pops, which is the bedrock of our economy. And why are these institutions, and luckily, thank goodness for the press, they went after some of the big companies, Shake Shack and all the others. You know, this wasn't what this was for. This is to help that small business with, you know, fewer employees survive.
Let me ask you a more nuanced question about a McConnell demand. The first one obviously is ridiculous, but it's a little tougher on the business liability question because you've been,
Sure.
You know, a businessman and an advocate for business, but you're a progressive. How do you balance those things in thinking about liability questions around COVID?
Liability is something we need to think about. It should not be connected to this funding for the city and the states. Two, to me, totally separate issues. Some protections for companies, if they bring folks back and they get the COVID, you know, I think companies got to protect their employees, but you know, every company is going to be worried about that if they bring someone back and they then get the COVID, that they may get sued. So I understand that we got to have protections and we got to figure out a way to protect businesses through no fault of their own, that, you know, that people contract the COVID, but it shouldn't be tied to the what we need to do the city and states in the state. I mean, we got to get our economy going back. Small business is what's going to bring this engine back. But I understand from the business side, you know, I started my first business at 14, started 25 companies. I've had huge success in business. I've had huge failure. I've seen all of it. I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. I wouldn't give a day back. Never worked for anyone in my life. I've just, you know, but I think anyone who is in politics today should have had that great pleasure of sweating out a Friday afternoon payroll to wondering how you're going to pay your employees. I think that helps you build characters. So I'm all for, you know, I'm very pro-business, smart business, but we got it and can't do it at the expense of our states and cities.
Let me just remind our attendees, the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, you can ask questions of the governor, and I will get to as many as I can. Let's get back to politics. Let's talk about governor's races, not getting as much attention, obviously, as the presidential or the Senate or holding the House. How are you feeling about, we did really well in 2018. How are you feeling about Democrats this cycle?
Yeah. And let me tell you, 2018, I spent a year on the road campaigning for governor's candidates. Number one, because I'm just a huge believer that governors are the ones that actually have to produce. No offense to the Congress today, but it's not like they really get much done. I mean, in a crisis, they'll come together, but outside of that, they barely talk to each other. We don't have that luxury at the state level. We got to produce, we got to create jobs. We have to do it every day. Doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican, you got to produce. And as I say, I served as chairman of the NGA, Republican. I had 2/3 Republicans and Democrats on it. It was apolitical. What's the best practices and what can you do to help your citizens the most? I think that's the most important. But the good news out of 18 was we won, Matt, 7 new governorships. And what was important to me in a state like Wisconsin and Michigan, because the governors also control in most of the states the electoral boards, fair, open elections. And as we know, you saw in Georgia where 500,000 people were thrown off on the signature, faulty signature. Allegedly, if I signed it, Terrence R. McAuliffe, but I didn't put the R in, I got knocked off. Disproportionately affected the African-American community, and Stacey ends up losing by 50,000 votes. Same thing went on with Scott Walker in Wisconsin. So we won Wisconsin, we won Michigan. So of the 3 states that I worry about, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, we now have Democratic governors. All I'm asking for is fair, no excuse absentee balloting, early vote, make it easy for people to vote. And I thought it was a disgrace this year. You saw Governor Evers in Wisconsin say we should not have elections. It's not safe. And the Republicans who wanted to get this judgeship on the Supreme Court, they plowed ahead with it. The court shockingly, and the Supreme Court shockingly in my mind, agreed with them. And so we went ahead and what we have 5 out of 180 in Milwaukee, and we won the judgeship by 100,000 votes. But I tragically read the other day that 7 of the poll workers now have COVID. This is really serious stuff. And we need to make sure that we have vote by mail. For us this year, I think the biggest governor's race for us is North Carolina. Roy Cooper, great governor. I just did a Zoom fundraiser for him the other night. We have a Senate seat there. We can make that a presidential blue state this year. In addition, Roy has an opportunity of picking up a chamber this year. So for us, winning that North Carolina seat, I think is so important for us going forward. When I ran and won, when I ran in 13, remember all statewide in Virginia were Republican. I broke a 44-year trend to get elected. We won all the statewide. We had 32 members in the House of Delegates, Democrats out of 100. I had a very right-wing legislature, socially. We remember in 13, we had the transvaginal bill. We became a laughing stock on American television. Horrible anti-women, anti-gay, anti-climate change, all that stuff they were horrible on. We slowly chipped away at that. It took us 6 years. We are now a blue state. We control everything. And what happened? We protected women's rights. We passed the ERA. We got a minimum wage done. Really great things. That's what happens when you ultimately end up with Democrats in governance, just open and welcoming to everyone. North Carolina, I think, is the next in that southern bloc, I think, to become a blue state. But they're going to do everything they can to disenfranchise. I mean, this is a battle. And Roy, like I had in my first 2 years, horrible battles with the Republican legislature. As I mentioned earlier, in Virginia, we're one of 2 states that if you're a felon, you lose your voting rights for the rest of your life. And in order to become a felon in Virginia, you have to steal $200 or more. So if you steal an iPhone or sneakers or whatever, you're a felon. If you do it at 18 years old, you don't vote for the rest of your life. I just think that's very unfair. So as you know, I used executive authority and restored the rights of 206,000 folks. They've served their time. Let them back in society. I want them back working. I want them paying taxes. I want them part of their communities. But the idea you weren't in 40 states, it's automatic. I mean, it's the southern states, Jim Crow. In 1902 in Virginia, a state senator put in our Constitution, and his quote was that day, "I am doing this to eliminate the darky from being a political factor in Virginia." Well, I stood there 114 years later and restored the rights, and Republicans sued me. I got sued for contempt of court. I won ultimately. But my point is, we've got to deal with these big, broad issues, and that's what governors can do. We still have racism in the country. I dealt with it at Charlottesville when you got inequities in school. inequities in housing, criminal justice. I pardoned a guy, Lenny Singleton. Listen to this, Matt. Your viewers will find this shocking. Lenny Singleton was a young man who had a drug habit. He committed 5 robberies. He stole $511 collectively. He was stealing, going to 7-Eleven, stealing for his drug habit. Nobody was ever injured. 5 robberies, $511. Guess what his sentence was in Virginia, Matt? Take a guess.
20 years.
20. Close. 2 life sentences plus 130 years.
Oh, God.
Google it, Lenny Singleton. That's what I'm telling you. I mean, we still, especially in these southern states, we got a long way to go. But that's why electing Democrats and governors, you can really change the arc of history.
It is remarkable to me that the question of whether more people should vote has become partisan. You have one party that thinks everyone should vote, and one party who is actively and openly trying to get people to not vote.
Right.
And so I guess the question is, how do people like Stacey Abrams, who's doing a tremendous amount of work on this, and Eric Holder and others, how do Democrats like the folks on this in this meeting help ensure that we are spreading the franchise and ensuring the right to vote goes as far and deep as we can?
Yeah, and let's be clear. Trump's only game plan is to disenfranchise voters, to make it harder for people to vote. Folks, turn up and show up like we've done in 17, 18, 19, 20. We're going to win this election. So we're filing suits all over the country. In Florida, we just won down there. In fact, they did a referendum to let the felons down there vote, and I think it was 68%. What did the governor do? He said, no, you can't vote unless you pay your outstanding court fines and so forth. That's a poll tax. It went all the way up. We just won that suit. And they can now vote without having to pay outstanding court fines. So we've got a ton of suits through the NDRC. Mark Elias, who, as you know well, we are filing suits every single day. All we want is for people to be able to go vote, make it an easy process. Democrat, Republican, it doesn't matter. But you know, why do we have fewer polling booths in African-American communities? We know why they do this. And that's why it's not the federal government, it's the states that have to do it. Now, we should have a national vote bill, which the Democrats in Congress have tried to do, and for more money for new machines. As governor, I got rid of all of our DRE. If we got folks on, let's say Georgia, all the machines are still DRE machines where you punch them. And I remember I went and voted in 14. I just moved to Richmond. I just got elected governor, and I went in and all the cameras were with me. There was only one thing on the ballot. It was Mark Warner versus Ed Gillespie in the Senate race. That's it. Shouldn't take long to vote. I went in, closed the curtain. I hit the machine for Warner. Gillespie's name lit up. I did it 4 times. I'm thinking, the press must think I'm an idiot here. I can't even vote. And I finally, Warner lit up, and I hit the vote button, and I walked out, but no paper receipts in Virginia. And I was very disturbed by that. It happened to me again the next year. And I put money in my budget so every county could get new voting machines. I was going to pay for it. I found out, which I didn't know, Matt, that the voting machine companies are very powerful. They take the local folks on vacation, whatever it may be, and they didn't want to change any of these machines. So here's the governor putting the money in the budget to buy everyone new machines. I was voted down by a Republican legislature. But so I took the machines and I hired hackers, professional hackers, to come into Virginia. Listen to this. Off-site, it took them 6 minutes to hack into our OptiScan machines. It took another 2 minutes to change a vote. So at that point, I felt I had enough power on my side. I used executive authority, and I banned every single DRE OptiScan machine in Virginia. And about probably 40% of the counties still used them. So they had to buy new machines, not paid for by the state anymore because they lost the bill. So now in Virginia, we have only paper receipts, which is important. I mention this to all of you on the call because this is real. Now, I'm not saying when I touched Warner and Gillespie showed up that was malicious. What you find out is just like your iPhone, over time, you've got 2 plates of glass and maybe the glue in between over time as 40-year-old machines deteriorates. Okay, my point is, I was able to stand there and fix it. You got some 80-year-old woman with macular degeneration, who knows what could happen? We've got to get smarter. We also have to get smarter. And Bill Nelson would be in the United States Senate today. He would easily have been reelected, except for in a county in Virginia, in Florida, just like in 2000, they had the ballot and Bill Nelson's name was on the bottom of the instructions and then everything else. Thousands and thousands of people skipped this. They didn't see it. That's just a stupid mistake. We got to be smarter. We got to approve every ballot that goes to the machine. I'm still mad over 2000 in the butterfly ballot. We got to be smarter.
Yeah, I think if someone had told you and me in 2000 that in 20 years voting would still be problematic in this kind of physical way, we would not have believed it, but here we are.
We do need to go to vote by mail. 5 states in America have it today. It's Utah and Hawaii, Colorado, Oregon, and Washington. I tried to get it passed in Virginia. I was where some of my legislatures were not there yet. We in Virginia, we got rid of, we used to have like 15 excuses to get an absentee ballot. Like, what do you care? If someone wants to vote by mail, who cares what your excuse is? We got rid of it this year. We extended early vote 45 days. We made Election Day a state holiday in Virginia. The next step is to do vote by mail. We should mail every registered voter a ballot. And they can drop it off at a community center or mail it back and pay for the postage. When we get control of the Congress next time, there are some fundamental things we need to do for democracy. To uphold, we are the greatest democracy in the world, but they look at our elections and say, what goes on in America?
We have time for one more question. I want to make it kind of a broad one about the thing everybody's thinking about. If you are going to go on television tomorrow and talk about Joe Biden, if you were writing one of those op-eds like Pluff and Axelrod wrote yesterday to the Biden campaign, what's the thing you want to emphasize most in this cycle?
Yeah. And let me just say this generally, if you got advice for the Biden campaign, pick up the phone and call them.
Right.
I don't need to read about it in newspapers. We are fighting the most existential threat in the future of the United States of America with Donald Trump 4 more years. We can't take 4 more, the world can't take 4 more years. So my advice is if you got a complaint, pick up the phone, call people. That's how I feel about that topic. But listen, Biden's got the experience. He's dealt with these crises before, Ebola and so forth. He's beloved around the globe. We got to have a president back. We had such global prestige, which has really been hurt over the last 4 years. He put us right back in the Paris Climate Agreement. He'd get us back in the Iranian nuclear deal, things that would make the world safer and better. He's got the experience to do it. And that's what we need. And I think people just want to have a comfort factor that the next president's going to have some empathy. I mean, Trump has failed to show any empathy at all to these folks who got COVID, those that died, the family and so forth. We just want someone who can relate to us, who has empathy for what people are going through. It is going to be a rough 4 years. This economy is not going to be the same. It's going to take a long time. We need real leadership on this economy. But there are things we ought to be able to do. We ought to have an infrastructure bill. Everyone ought to be connected. We ought to have internet in every single rural town in America. There's basic things, Matt, we need to do. And the good thing I always say about Joe Biden, I'm dealing with the campaign a lot, is A, he listens, which I love about someone running for president. They actually listen to people. But that he hires good people. And when he's president, I think he's going to put a great cabinet together. I mean, look at the Trump cabinet. I mean, everybody's acting and so forth. But, I would tell the public that, Joe knows you, fight for you. He's got the empathy, but he's got the experience to be president. He's been through the fire before, and we're going to need him now going forward. And let's stay positive. We got too many lemon suckers in this party. Quit complaining, quit whining. Let's go out and win.
On behalf of my colleagues at Third Way, people on this call, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for your dedication to public service and to the Democratic Party. And on behalf of Virginians everywhere, I am begging you to return to Richmond because we need you. Thank you so much.
I've told everybody, one, we got to get Biden reelected, and here in Virginia, Matt, we got to get Abigail Spanberg and Elaine Luria back.
We sure do.
But I am most seriously considering running again because we will be in a horrible economy as all the states will be. If the state were doing great, I have no interest. I like challenges. I like to go where you're needed most. I think going back and rebuilding that Virginia economy is something that gets me excited. But I'm all on Biden right now, and then I'll make a decision a week after the election.
Thank you. Thank you to all of us, all the people that joined us, and we will be back in touch soon with yet another one of these really fantastic talks. Governor, thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.